It's a warm California evening. The sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red as cars whiz by on the freeway. Among them, a sleek black sedan glides through the traffic. Behind the wheel sits Peter, a 40-year-old black man with the steady composure of someone who has seen it all. But tonight, even he isn't prepared for what's about to unfold. Blue and red lights flash behind him. A police cruiser pulls up, signaling him to stop. Peter slows down, pulls over, and exhales deeply. This isn't the first time he's been stopped, but it stings every time. Out steps Jason, a white officer in his mid-40s, the swagger in his step unmistakable. He approaches the car, his hand resting on his holster, his expression unreadable. Jason speaks, his tone clipped and condescending. "License and registration. Is this your car?" Peter keeps his movements slow and deliberate. He retrieves his documents, handing them over without a word. Jason examines the paperwork with exaggerated scrutiny, glancing up at Peter. "You sure you didn't borrow this, buddy?" Peter's jaw tightens, but he keeps his voice calm. "Officer, is there a problem?" Jason leans closer, his tone hardening. "A man like you driving a car like this? You tell me." For a moment, silence hangs in the air, thick with tension. Then Peter reaches into his jacket and pulls out his badge. Jason stumbles back, stunned. His voice falters. "You're a cop?" Peter locks eyes with him, his voice firm. "This won't be the last time you'll hear about this." As Jason stands frozen, Peter drives off, leaving behind a man who doesn't yet realize his world is about to change forever. Now, let's go back a little to understand how two men on the same side of the law ended up on opposite sides of justice. Peter Jones was born and raised in Oakland, California, in a modest neighborhood where hard work wasn't just a virtue, it was survival. His father, Leonard, worked long hours as a mechanic, his hands perpetually stained with grease, while his mother, Esther, balanced two part-time jobs. Yet despite their struggles, the Jones household was a place of warmth, laughter, and unshakable values. Leonard often told Peter, "Son, the world might not always be fair to you, but that doesn't mean you stop doing what's right." Esther, on the other hand, was the disciplinarian, ensuring that Peter and his younger sister, Naomi, never strayed too far from the straight and narrow. From a young age, Peter admired the uniformed officers patrolling his neighborhood, though he couldn't ignore the tension their presence sometimes created. He saw them as protectors, yet he also noticed how they looked at people who looked like him. As he grew older, this duality sparked a desire in him to become an officer, not to enforce power, but to bridge the divide between law enforcement and the communities they served. Peter excelled in school, particularly in history and debate, where he honed his ability to stand firm and argue for justice. His high school years were marked not just by academic success, but also by love. He met Monica during a school play. She was the lead actress, and he was the quiet stagehand who couldn't take his eyes off her. Their love story blossomed, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and unwavering support. After graduating from college with a degree in criminal justice, Peter joined the police academy, determined to be the kind of officer who didn't just serve, but truly understood his community. Over the years, he climbed the ranks, earning respect not only for his professionalism, but also for his compassion. Peter and Monica built a beautiful life together, raising 4 children, David 15, Jasmine 12, Noah 8, and little Abigail 5. His children saw him as a hero, not just because of his uniform, but because of the way he lived his values every day. To his neighbors, Peter was more than a cop. He was a mentor, a coach, and a friend. He had everything he ever dreamed of, but dreams didn't shield him from the harsh realities of being a black man in America. Jason Carter's story began in the suburbs of Bakersfield, California, in a home where appearances masked the turbulence within. His mother, Carol, ruled the household with an iron will and an unshakable belief in her own superiority. "Remember, Jason," she often said, "we're not like them." Carol's disdain for minorities wasn't subtle. It was in the way she clutched her purse tighter around certain people, the way she refused to let Jason play with the Hernandez kids down the street, and the venom in her words when the evening news showed faces that weren't like theirs. Jason's father, Robert, was a quiet man who often disappeared into his garage, escaping Carol's relentless grip. When Jason was just 10 years old, Robert left for good, leaving Jason alone with his mother's ideology. Carol's words became gospel, shaping Jason's worldview. Jason grew into a disciplined but emotionally closed-off young man. He joined the police academy not out of a desire to serve, but because it offered structure and authority, two things he craved in a life filled with uncertainty. But Jason wasn't all hardened edges. He met Emma, a spirited and compassionate woman, during a police fundraiser. She was unlike anyone he'd ever known, warm, empathetic, and unafraid to call him out. Despite their differences, they fell in love and married. Emma tried to soften Jason's edges, challenging his beliefs with patience and love. Over time, she realized the depth of Carol's influence on her husband. Jason, she once said, if you keep walking this path, it won't just hurt you, it'll hurt our kids. They had two children, Caleb 14 and Sophie 11, who adored their father but began to mirror his prejudices in troubling ways. Caleb started making snide remarks at school, while Sophie withdrew from her diverse group of friends, parroting her father's views without fully understanding them. Emma was heartbroken. She loved Jason, but couldn't ignore the impact his biases were having on their family. For years, she pleaded with him to see the world differently, but Jason dismissed her concerns, saying, "I'm just teaching them how the world really works." While Jason rose through the ranks at the precinct, earning a reputation for being tough but effective, his home life became a quiet battlefield. Emma remained determined to fight for their children's future, even as Jason's views seemed unshakable. These two men, so different yet bound by the same badge, were hurtling toward a collision that would change them forever. Their paths, shaped by the choices and beliefs of those who raised them, were about to converge in a way neither could have anticipated. The day after the traffic stop, Peter sat in his home office, replaying the incident in his mind. His wife, Monica, walked in, balancing a cup of coffee in one hand and Abigail, their youngest, in the other. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" she asked, setting the coffee on his desk. Peter nodded. "I can't let this slide, Monica. If I let it go, what message does that send to our kids? To David? To Jasmine?" Monica placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then don't let it slide. But remember, this isn't just about Jason. It's about all the people he's been treating this way. You have to do this the right way." At the precinct, the tension was already thick. Peter's formal complaint against Jason wasn't just a personal grievance. It was a direct challenge to the unspoken codes of silence among officers. Jason, meanwhile, brushed off the situation, telling his wife, Emma, over dinner that Peter was being dramatic. Emma sighed, setting down her fork. "Jason, this is about Peter. This is about you. You can't keep acting like this and expect there won't be consequences." "You don't understand, Emma," Jason snapped. "This is how things work. You have to question people. It's part of the job." "Is it?" she shot back. "Or is it just how you work?" At work, Peter found himself under a microscope. Some colleagues supported him, applauding his courage, while others muttered about airing dirty laundry. Despite the pressure, Peter pressed forward, knowing this wasn't just about him. It was about standing up for what was right. Meanwhile, Jason's behavior began to ripple through his family. Caleb was caught making racist remarks to a classmate during lunch, and Sophie's grades began slipping as she withdrew from her friends. Emma confronted Jason. "Your actions are affecting our children, Jason. Caleb thinks it's okay to say those things because he hears them from you." Jason's face darkened. "Don't pin this on me. He's just being a kid." "No," Emma said firmly. "He's being your kid, and it's not okay." At work, Jason started to feel the weight of the complaint. His supervisor called him in, warning him about the seriousness of the allegations. For the first time, doubt crept into Jason's mind. Was Peter really just being dramatic, or had he crossed a line he didn't even see? As the investigation into the traffic stop gained momentum, both men found their lives upended. For Peter, the scrutiny brought moments of doubt. Was it worth the cost to his family? For Jason, the walls of his carefully constructed worldview began to crack under the weight of the truth. The precinct called for mediation, forcing Peter and Jason into the same room for the first time since the incident. Jason's tone was defensive, his words clipped. "I didn't mean anything by it. You're making this bigger than it needs to be." Peter's voice was calm but firm. "Do you hear yourself, Jason? This isn't about what you meant. It's about what you did. It's about what you've been doing for years. People like me, people in our community, deserve better from someone who wears the same badge. Jason looked away, his jaw tightening. The words struck deeper than he cared to admit, but he wasn't ready to face them. Not yet. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Officers, community members, and reporters filled the seats, their whispers blending into a hum of anticipation. Peter sat with Monica beside him, her hand resting on his. Across the aisle, Jason sat with Emma, her face tight with a mixture of support and disapproval. Peter's lawyer began by painting a vivid picture of the systemic issues within the department, using Jason's actions as an example. This isn't just about a traffic stop, the lawyer said. It's about accountability. It's about trust, and it's about justice. Jason's lawyer countered, claiming the incident was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Jason himself took the stand, his words measured but defensive. I've worked with Peter for years. I respect him. This was never about race. It was about doing my job. But the courtroom shifted when Emma was called as a witness. She stepped forward, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. Jason is my husband and I love him, she began. But I can't ignore the impact his actions have had, not just on others, but on our family. I've watched my children adopt his prejudices. I've tried to change him, but it hasn't been enough. Maybe this will be. Jason's head dropped as her words landed like a blow. For the first time, he looked not at his lawyer but at Peter. The weight of his choices began to settle in his chest. Jason Carter sat alone in his living room late one evening, the trial still fresh in his mind. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Emma had gone to bed hours ago, her silence heavy with disappointment. His children, Caleb and Sophie, hadn't said much to him since the trial began. Jason flipped through a stack of papers Emma had left on the coffee table. Reports from the school about Caleb's bullying and Sophie's increasing isolation. Caleb had been caught mocking a classmate for their skin color, and Sophie had stopped talking to her best friend, a girl from a diverse background, entirely. He ran a hand through his hair, the weight of it all pressing down on him. His actions hadn't just hurt Peter, they were poisoning his own family. Jason's mind drifted back to the courtroom. Emma's testimony had been a wake-up call, but Peter's closing words had cut even deeper. We all have a responsibility, Peter had said, his voice steady, to not just recognize our biases, but to challenge them. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary for our families, for our communities, and for ourselves. For the first time in years, Jason allowed himself to question everything he'd been taught, everything he'd believed. Peter's victory in the case was met with applause from the courtroom and support from the community. The settlement was significant, but for Peter, this wasn't about money. It was about sending a message that accountability mattered, no matter who you were. As reporters crowded around him on the courthouse steps, Peter raised his hand to quiet them. This isn't just my win, he said. This is a win for everyone who's ever been made to feel less than. But let me be clear. This isn't about punishment. It's about growth. If we're going to move forward as a society, we have to be willing to confront uncomfortable truths and do the hard work of changing ourselves. The crowd cheered, but Peter's mind was already on what came next. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the beginning. Jason wasn't ready to reach out to Peter right away. He spent weeks wrestling with his guilt and confusion, avoiding his family and retreating into his own thoughts. But Emma wasn't about to let him off the hook. One evening, she handed him a flyer for an anti-bias training session. You need to go, she said firmly. If not for Peter, then for us. For Caleb and Sophie. Jason hesitated, but saw the resolve in her eyes. He nodded. Okay. The sessions were uncomfortable at first, forcing Jason to confront truths he'd buried for decades. He sat in rooms filled with people from different walks of life, listening to their stories and beginning to understand the pain his actions had caused. Slowly, the walls he'd built around himself began to crumble. At home, Jason started making amends with his family. He had long, difficult conversations with Caleb and Sophie, admitting his mistakes and encouraging them to see the world differently. He listened as Emma shared years of pent-up frustration and vowed to be better for her, for their children, and for himself. Months after the trial, Jason finally reached out to Peter. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when he knocked on Peter's door. Monica answered, her expression wary. "Is Peter home?" Jason asked. Monica hesitated before calling for her husband. When Peter appeared, his face was unreadable. Jason cleared his throat, his voice low. "I owe you an apology, not just for what happened that day, but for everything before it. I was wrong, Peter, and I'm trying to change." Peter studied Jason for a long moment before nodding. "Change isn't easy," he said, his tone even, "but it's a start." The two men talked for hours, finding common ground in their shared experiences as officers, fathers, and men trying to do better. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a beginning. Jason's journey wasn't just about redemption, it was about transformation. He became an advocate for anti-bias training within the department, speaking openly about his past mistakes and encouraging others to confront their own prejudices. Peter, too, used his platform to push for systemic change, mentoring younger officers and working with community leaders to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they served. As the months turned into years, their lives remained intertwined, not as adversaries, but as allies in the fight for justice. In the end, their story wasn't just about a traffic stop or a courtroom battle. It was about the power of accountability, the courage to change, and the hope that even the deepest divides could be bridged with understanding and effort. Because sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in the streets or the courts, they're fought within ourselves, and it's those battles that define who we truly are. It was a bright, sunny afternoon at the annual community outreach event in downtown Los Angeles. The park was alive with the sounds of laughter, music, and the chatter of neighbors coming together. Booths lined the pathways, offering everything from local crafts to free health checkups. In the center of it all stood Peter and Jason, side by side, handing out brochures about the newly implemented anti-bias programs in their precinct. Their families were nearby, Monica chatting with Emma as their children played together, Caleb and Sophie tossing a frisbee with David and Jasmine. The scene was one of unity, a stark contrast to the tension and division of the months before. Peter turned to Jason, extending his hand. Jason hesitated for a moment before taking it firmly, a small smile breaking across his face. "I never thought I'd say this," Jason said quietly, "but I'm glad we went through all of this. It opened my eyes." Peter nodded. "Change is never easy, but it's worth it. True justice begins when we acknowledge our flaws and commit to change. It's never about perfection. It's about progress. And in a world divided by so many lines, it's moments like these that remind us those lines can be erased, together. What kind of world do we want to leave for our children? One of division or one of understanding? The choice is ours to make every single day.